Hey everyone, welcome back to Admix for another episode of Giving the Game Away. And today, Ian and I are going to talk about the science of mixing game genres. Hey Ian.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm doing well. And super excited to hear what you have in store for us today.
Of course. Well, it's one of those things that you kind of take for granted because it's sort of really common today. Years ago, back in the early days of gaming, games were pretty much one genre affairs. You had your racers, you had your platformers, you had RPGs and the advent of that generation. And over the past couple of decades, people have been mixing together massively. Puzzle platformers, action RPGs, very, very common in the console space, the PC space, mobile space as well. But you look at the top grossing charts on App Store, Play Store, and it's always single genre games that are really standing out. Like Clash of Clans, basic, fairly straightforward strategy type game. Fire Age, fairly straightforward strategy game. They throw in elements, almost MMO-like elements too, but at the end of the day, it's still pretty straight line strategy. And you have to ask yourself why mixed genre games aren't as effective. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today by basically saying that's completely wrong. Don't assume that. Mixed genre games are incredibly effective. They're not breaking the top ceiling of grossing or anything, but they are amazing in a lot of different ways, whether that's from a marketing perspective or, a revenue perspective. We might not have an incredible, we do have some incredible revenue examples, which we'll get into later. But the big names, they might not be mixed genre, but this is still a great money-making opportunity. Have you noticed the single genre trend in high-grossing games?
Definitely more and more lately. You see some types of games like hyper-casual dominating a specific categories. For example, number of downloads. I guess what we are less looking at is stuff around retention or average revenue per user. These are not really metrics that are easily surfaced in the App Store, for example. And so we're not really comparing or benchmarking games based on those. We're comparing them based on the key metrics like downloads or top grossing games, for example. So I assume that we can miss a lot of trends by just looking at these 2 or 3 KPIs.
That's another question, isn't it? Do you think the App Store should have a highest retention category or something like that?
I don't think it's retention on its own is not the most meaningful. I think the top grossing games that already integrates retention because you can only generate huge amounts of revenue if you have recurring users. But this is why tools like Apptopia, for example, which we're not endorsing or anything like that, it's just those tools are really good because they let you slice the data in different ways and enable you to create your top list.
Very fair point. Hybrid games in general, mixed genre games, they are great for retention. We'll get into that. In essence, the 2 things I really wanted to focus on were the general, businessy benefits of mixing genres. So, the fact that hybrid games in general let smaller developers fight these big titans of industry. By making a hybrid casual game, you are putting yourself on a really good foot to fight games like Clash of Clans. And that might not be immediately obvious. And the other side of it is really why hybrid is the best of both genres that it works with. It's bigger than the sum of its parts. Every genre has a weakness, which we've discussed countless times. Like hyper casual is inherently short retention. For example, the monetization methods are limited because of that. We've spoken about strategy having issues with user acquisition because, it's expensive to get that. Yeah, exactly. We've spoken about hybrid casual games and how a hyper casual acquisition model can then apply to a strategy game or a mid-core game to sort of get the best of both worlds in that regard. Archer is a great example of that. Archer is one of my favorite examples of that, in fact, because it's so simple in its premise, but the metagame is huge. It's literally, the gameplay is literally drag your finger to move around and your character automatically shoots. But the equipment and the levels and all of that stuff, it really draws you further in. So you've got a really, accessible game loop, something really fun, something people love to play. But you get drawn further and further in, so you become this high retention, most likely paying player.
Yeah,
which is fantastic. And Archer made what, $8.5 million in its first month. So that goes to show the monetization benefits of a hybrid game in that sense. And if you want to hear more about that, go listen to our hyper casual podcast or the article we wrote about that. There's other examples. So puzzle RPG is a really huge one. It currently accounts for 20% of total US game revenue on iOS. So that's fairly recent. I'm not sure the exact time frame, but it shot up. And they're interesting because they feature a lot of other features like gachas or guilds, or which give you social pressure, or even subscriptions. Again, a very accessible format in the puzzle genre, giving way to deeper mechanics that convert users into other kinds of super important. Playrix is a great example of that. Playrix are puzzle game developer by their own confession. They've done Homescapes, Gardenscapes. They're the big games in that area, and they are puzzle RPGs. I think the biggest power of Playrix is that they're combining narrative into them as well. You don't get that much customization in those games, really. You just choose from 3 carpets, for example, but it still weirdly empowers you and draws you in.
I think it's we talked about last week, right, about this these maps of how you should design for a specific behavior. And if you are, we discussed that it was actually better to try to focus on a specific audience with a specific mechanics that they're responding well to. And I think what hybrid opens is the ability to do that, but also target another mechanic and maybe target really the best of both worlds. And as you said, right, to leverage cheap acquisition with potentially higher retention.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really important. I actually have a quote from the creative director of Playrix that sort of emphasizes that. He said, his name is Igor Ilovikov. I think I didn't butcher that.
Nice.
He says, this proves casual players can be intentionally matured to move towards more mid-core mechanics by light introduction of mid-core features. And he's saying exactly what you're saying. He's saying that we're targeting a certain genre of consumer, but we are turning those consumers into more avid gamers who are interested in other genres. They're sort of acting as a gateway drug into the deeper gaming ecosphere. And that's really important for the overall health of gaming. You've got to, for gaming to exist and propagate as an industry, we need to get these accidental gamers and we need to turn them into real gamers and drive them further into the funnel and engage them.
That's the holy grail, right? We talked about in the hyper casual podcast, we talked about the different ways that hyper casual could go to grow and to become an even more successful channel. One of them was to go even more casual, but the other one was to effectively mix genre and create greater retention, because they already figured out acquisition. They have literally hundreds of millions of users playing the game. So by just adding a couple mechanics, mixing the genre a little bit, you can then, by simply extending your average session time by maybe 20%, all of a sudden this is literally millions of dollars in advertising, because you can just target the users and send them a few more ad impressions per session. So this is basically the core of everything. Either you're starting with really strong game mechanics and then you're trying to hack your acquisition and find niches of cheap users, or you can go the other way, which is get the users and then try to add more retention mechanics, which is traditionally a lot harder because retention needs to be built at the core of the game. But the future will tell if that this hybrid casual genre actually can scale for more than 1 or 2 hits.
Yeah, well, I really do hope that it can, because it is a really good monetization method. We'll dive into that a little bit more.
And for the user as well, right? It's
exactly.
You get bored of hyper casual games after a while. It's really, I mean, some people obviously they have been extremely successful, but it's not the type of game that you would talk to your friends about. Well, I've discovered this game, it's amazing, right? It's really a pastime. It's something that you do when you have time. And so if you can create a bit more excitement, more attention, more things to do, then all of a sudden people would get even more passionate about the game, not just use it when they have a few minutes to kill, but talk about it and really turn this into almost IP or something that is just that has more defensibilities and is more exciting to play.
For sure, yeah. I'm obviously a huge fan of the philosophical argument of turning accidental gamers into real gamers. I like the idea of my mum becoming a hardcore COD fanatic.
Let's see how it goes.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm easing her in on Gardenscapes. But like you said, I think some of those single genre categories, like hyper casual, I worry that they have a shelf life for players. I worry that people will get bored of the repetition, and it becomes this flip-flopping between hyper casual games and social media, which isn't happening right now. It's absolutely just a fear, and we don't have any reason to believe that. But mixing genres is a great way of getting around that fear well in advance. I don't know, is that a fear that you share, Sam? Do you think we're ever going to have that flip-flop?
I mean, yeah, no, I think it's I think it's a bit of a gray area to some extent. Like, where does the genre definition stop exactly, right?
Yeah.
And mixing genre, it doesn't just become a new genre. So it's a lot of terminology as well. Like, where does it stop? Where does it start? I personally sometimes have trouble to identify what the game, what is the game supposed to be. I feel like, as you said, right, it's not as clear cut as it used to be, where you had, okay, this is a platformer, this is FPS. Like, there's just so much more variety right now that sometimes it's just hard to create a proper taxonomy for it. So I think, this is why I like to think in terms of more mechanics, right? Identifying unique mechanics more than just putting games into buckets, because I think it can be a bit restrictive, and that is the consequence of so many different genre mixing, that at the end of the day, I'm not sure we'll just be able to identify games very easily, except by mechanics.
Very fair. The categorization of mechanics is probably more useful for conversation, because, as you say, hyper casual is sort of very vague. That could be flicking, tapping, swiping, but there are mechanics within that, flicking, swiping, blah, 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 that are easily described. And RPG mechanics tend to be classic things like leveling up and stuff like that.
That would be a great white paper. We need to compile all of those mechanics, plot them on a timeline, what was hot when. I know that right now in hyper casual, the stacking mechanics, I don't know if you've seen the stacking game, this is what's hot right now. In 3 hours it might be different, but that's what's hot at this very moment. I know that last year swiping, all of this stuff it's interesting because, and we're going a bit on a tangent here, but like, it's not, I don't think any user would tell you, oh, I love swiping games or I love stacking games. This is just insight that are being driven from data. It's not something that users consciously say that they like. It's just big publishers that see that in the data. Okay, this stacking game has higher retention than the others, therefore stacking is hot. So it's just almost a non-tangible insight, but really interesting.
I mean, a lot of studios are making design decisions based on data right now, which makes a lot of sense. We could even do some sort of like mix and match game feature design thing where people can just be given ideas of feature mash stuff. totally major tangent we're going on. But yeah, very important, huge implications for lots of other things. The last little part I wanted to talk about in terms of mixing genres is just a bit more focus on the practical side of things for the developer. So first of all, App Store optimization is one of the major ways that mixing genres let you stand up against the big dogs. And App Store optimization isn't something we've actually spoken about much, I don't think, have we?
No, we haven't. No, definitely not. This was never the topic of a full podcast, and it should be.
It really is. Oh, it absolutely should be. I sort of have the displeasure of skimming over it right now. App Store optimization is like search engine optimization, which is basically finding the keywords, finding the phrases that will make you show up in search results. Because just showing up in search results is half the battle. If you can show up in search results, you are in a really good place to get a bigger audience and for that audience to share your app and all of that stuff. Mixing genres let you combine keywords from two different categories of game, which means you are going to have your own niche. And that's what the most important thing is, having a niche. Don't try and be the best at making burgers in the world. Find a niche within making burgers that you can become the best of. Simone Giertz, who is a YouTuber, she's known as the queen of shitty robots. A phrase that stuck with me that she said was that she tried to be an engineer and she realized that engineering's hard. So she chose a new category in shitty robots and she became the best at that. And I think that's a great philosophy to work by. Find a new genre,
absolutely,
find a combination of mechanics and sell that, be known for that. And that's huge because that's something that the big single genre games don't have. They are promoting the same keywords because they are one thing.
That's actually something that can be applied to entrepreneurship as well. Like a lot of things actually that we talk about that you can do as a game studio, you can apply it to like a company as a whole. When you are a up-and-coming startup with obviously a lot less firepower, a lot less resources than the big guys, you don't want to come up head-to-head with a big company. For example, at Admix, we're not trying to compete directly with Google, right? That would be silly. No matter how much funding we can raise, we would never be able to beat them at the exact same game. So what do? You just change the game. We create our own game with our own rules, our own KPI, our own definition of success, and we become the best at that. And that obviously is not as big of a market, but it's something that we can be the best at. And when Google or others want to expand there, the first thing they would do is looking at who is already doing it and who is the market leader for it. So definitely carving yourself a niche, which is not just about doing something better, it's about doing something different and creating your own rules for success. What does that mean to be successful in this genre? If you're creating another niche and you're kind of diverting a bit from hyper casual, maybe you want to optimize for other things, other KPIs, not simply number of impressions per session, for example, or low CPI. Maybe you figure out that your core KPI is slightly different because you're not only playing by their rules. So I think this is, it's not always possible, but it's always something that you should strive for. Try to be not just better, but try to be different, because you can't just possibly beat the big guys at their own game. So changing the game is the name of the game.
I mean, it also gives you focus as well. Like if we don't have the resources to do everything that Google can do because they do everything. But if we choose one niche within that, if you choose one niche within game design by choosing mixed genres, and as you chose a niche within ad tech, you can do that thing really well. You have focus that the bigger dogs don't have because they're trying to appeal to everyone. Admix can focus on in-play advertising and do it really well. A puzzle RPG developer can focus on that single mechanic and do it really well, and that's what separates you.
Yeah, totally.
Very important from a business perspective and from marketing your game. We've briefly touched on monetization as well. Worth touching on it again. Basically, explicitly, I wanted to say mixing genres lets you mix monetization methods more smoothly. Hyper casual, very good for advertising. Battle Royale, very good for customization stuff. If you combine those two genres, you can sort of access both of those methods in different ways. You can appeal to some users with advertising, but then you do have customization and deeper mechanics and in-app purchases that will further convert if they're open to it.
Definitely gives you some more flexibility on that front.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like a mechanics mash as well as an advertising mash as well as a mechanics mash.
Yeah.
Really super important. And basically, it all touches back on that idea of trying to be top of mind to a user. Because once you're top of mind in something, not only are you becoming bigger and basically getting your game out there more, you're creating a brand as a developer. You're being known for being different, doing something new, and building a brand as a developer will pay dividends in the long run. And that's
definitely. Yeah. Especially today with how crowded the stores are.
Exactly.
Getting featured in specific categories has become really a matter of how much user acquisition you can afford, pretty much. And so again, it's about, do I want to be part of that category? Do I want to play by those rules, or do I want to create my own rules? So it ties back to what we were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
But I was wondering so we talked about the positives. Of course, there's a lot of positives of mixing genre. I was wondering if you could highlight some of the risks maybe that could incur from, trying to go a bit off the beaten tracks.
There's a lot of risks. From a pure design perspective, to start with, you have the risk of overscoping, which is a huge problem as a developer, because suddenly you've got the best features from two genres to play with, and if you don't rein yourself back a bit, you can just try and make something far too big for you or your studio to make. And that makes your game seem messy and confusing, and the user experience gets sacrificed because of that. That's really about planning and self-control. And the other big pitfall from a business perspective would be monetization. I think mixed genre games, when you're trying something new, there is a bigger need to sort of beta test your monetization methods. Not necessarily like build a demo, that would be great. Literally asking your target audience what kind of advertising they respond to, what they would value. Because if you come into like a puzzle RPG thinking you're going to make all of your money from customizable skins for a 2D avatar, that's probably not going to happen. Again, something you can easily plan around, but it takes a lot more planning, I think.
Yeah, and you run the risk to not being as laser focused and not, again, we talked about like, okay, this is the mechanic that would appeal to these users. Exactly. If you start mixing around, you might end up doing two things okay instead of doing one thing great. And of course, you need to be doing something better than the others are. So by no means is mixing genre just compromising between two things. It's actually doing the two things the best, right? Otherwise, it's just not going to work. I think this is an important thing to mention.
Yeah, for sure. It really is finding that, finding a new space. When we're saying mix genres, we're not saying make two games and put them in one package. It is finding a space in between the two that you can call your own. And you can be focused if you find that space, but it's also really easy to get lost on that spectrum too. So stay focused, find your niche, monetize that crap out of it, make your players happy. That's all I got to say.
Great. No, I think it would be interesting to see over the next few years how much more merging genre are being created. I think we talked about, hybrid casual. I think that's probably the most obvious one out there. Do you see any other genre that are going to mix or that are already starting to mix over the next few years? What are your predictions?
Narrative games are on a huge rise in general right now. I can't remember, but a developer, a relatively big studio, put out a dating story game, which is getting great results. I think narrative in an age where everything is on demand like Netflix is going to be really important. And while I can't predict where it's going to be combined, obviously like Gardenscapes combine narrative into RPG, puzzle, unexpected. I think narrative is going to be a big thing. And I think if you find a niche where you can insert a really good narrative into it, even if it's like narrative arcade, just something that players can relate to and like follow the story of, I think that's going to be great. And I think it's on the rise already. But that takes a good writing team. Invest in writers. I think that's a good advice. Invest in writers.
You're pitching for a job.
always, man. I gotta take care of your writers, please. Yeah.
That's a good projection. We'll definitely go back in a year's time and look if that actually ended up being true. For sure. Look forward to it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ian. Thanks everyone for watching, and I see you next week for another episode.